All right. Before we get started, I was wondering if Jordan Haley is in the building right now, being summoned for on the spot panelist. All right. Well, I'll be on the lookout for him, and he'll join us shortly. But yeah, hello everyone. Welcome. I want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day, their busy schedules to get here. I'm sure everyone had some crazy story of traveling, crazy times, but glad y'all made it here safely. My name is Charley Reed, like I'd mentioned earlier, education director, Hoopa Yurok Karuk person. It's pretty cool to see the panelists here. I have a personal relationship with most of them, but also getting to know some of my fellow panelists on a deeper level. And obviously, we're here to talk about Landback, so I imagine that's going to be what we're talking about. But so we're going to start off with I think we have about 5 questions, very general, but also kind of specific to each of their experiences in Landback work, or just even what it means to be an Indigenous person working in this kind of Western world. So we'll start off by introducing ourselves, each panelist, and maybe tell us a bit about your work or experience with Landback.
Hi, my name is Jason Reed. I'm here on behalf of the Hoopa Valley Tribe's chairman, Joe Davis. Unfortunately, he had to go home sick yesterday. I think it was from the campaigning. He just got reelected, so we're out there on the front line, So I think he's kind of exhausted, and I got a little bit of age on him, so I'm still here. But but yeah, I'll be here on behalf of Joe and the Hoopa Valley Tribe. My name is Jason Reed. I'm the executive assistant to Joe Davis. I actually attended HSU here between 2015, 2019, majored in fisheries biology. Then went into restoration, fisheries restoration, and now my career is the chairman's assistant, and also I'm the president for the Hoopa Youth Football and Cheer Program.
Ayuki Kowada. My name is Ken Brink. A lot of people know me by Binks. I'm the vice chairman of the Karuk tribe. Very new vice chairman. Recently, I worked fisheries for the Karuk tribe for 20 plus years. I'm a traditional fisherman. I'm a traditional ceremonial person. I grew up in our traditional land all my life. Landback, it means a lot of things to our people, from just being able to perform our ceremonies on land in the beginning, to maybe some really poor, low income housing, and then now our tribe, we are buying our land and having it put in trust. So everything we got, we bought. Our ancestral territory is like 1.5 million acres, and we have less than 3,000, and most of that we bought, except for a little bit. They just gave our ceremonial land back just recently in the Sacred Lands Act back. Where we live, we experienced really catastrophic forest fire due to government mismanagement. And the Forest Service pretty much, the government owned all of our land where we live. So, land back to the people, to the Karuk tribe is, we know we don't own the land. We're here as stewards. Creator gave us the brain to sit us upright to be the managers and the stewards of the land. And that's why we're here. And, we were the first people who were homeless in America. They came and found us where we took thousands of years to preserve our land and build it up and make it beautiful. And that's the first place they came in, they took from the native people and made us homeless. The first people in America were the homeless people were Native Americans. We had and like we're resilient, like Dr. Cut just said, we look at the long picture, we plan to be here forever. We're here from the beginning and we ain't going nowhere. So we hope, with the management of the land, it's like these guys are failing, like the catastrophic forest fire is not burning up trees. People are dying in my land, like, people are burning up in their car trying to escape the fire. And my mom lost her house, and You know, so hopefully they realize that, you know, the land needs to be managed by the people again. You know, the way it was pristine when they got here. You know, they're starting to realize that these native people, you know, with their knowledge, they knew what they're doing. So our ecological tribal knowledge is way up here, like the scientific knowledge. And hopefully with Western science and all of us, we can put it together. You know, we know those people ain't going nowhere, but we ain't either. And we've been here since the beginning of time. And so we have to learn to coexist. And yeah, why can't we be managers and the owners of the land? You know, and so yeah, Yotua.
Ayuki, my name is Josh Saxton. I'm the executive director of the Karuk tribe. I've been that for about 5 years, and then 4 years before that, I was on the tribal council. So as Vice Chairman was saying, we recently had legislation passed. It was signed on January 5th by President Biden for the Kadamine and Amikyadam Sacred Lands Act. And I've been working with a team of Karuk people to conduct outreach and shepherd that legislation for about the last 4 to 5 years. And it got introduced November of 2021 and passed in December of 2022. So very unusual time frame for that. Those typically take a long time, but we kept it very simple. And it was very, very clear that this was a Sacred Lands Act, and it was a return of the center of the world for the Karuk people. And so I think that's what kind of helped us in our outreach, both locally and in DC, in terms of the simplicity of that legislation. But it wasn't that simple. There was a lot of components of that legislation that we just didn't know was going to be a part of that when we thought it was so simple. There was wild and scenic components. There was management components. There's the Forest Service components that are very complex. And so one of the things that we're looking to do as a component of that legislation is develop an MOU with the Forest Service over the next year. And that is going to be a heavy lift because they're a bureaucracy that does not like to negotiate with tribes. So just as a background, we are, like Vice Chair said, it's predominantly federal land where we're at. 98% of our ancestral territory is under federal management and occupied by the federal government. And they sometimes work with us and sometimes don't. And so we believe as Karuk, as Pikyawish people, as Fix the World people, that our role is to not own the land, but own the responsibility to the land. We have a duty and a responsibility to not just manage that landscape, but to recognize that our identity is intrinsically tied to that landscape. And so when you talk about land back, you're not just talking about returning land to people, you're talking about returning identity to Indigenous people. So thank you for being here. I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions. Yotwa.
Jimmy Sunway, my name is Morningstar Gali. I am a member of the Pit River Tribe located in Northeastern California. We just directly east of here. 11 years ago, I served as the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for my tribe for Pit River. We are 11 autonomous bands under the umbrella of Pit River Tribe. A lot of my background is grassroots involvement in sacred site protection and advocacy. I wear a couple of different hats. I'm very much honored to be a part of Save California Salmon. I've worked as the tribal water organizer, serve on the board as vice chair, and I also work for the International Indian Treaty Council as the California Tribal and Community Liaison. And we also now have a project called Indigenous Justice, formerly Restoring Justice for Indigenous Peoples, that works to address the disparities of California Indigenous communities and California Native American tribes. Today, we are conducting our soft launch of the California Tribal Land Trust Survey. And so directly right outside of the store on the right When you go out, there's the first table, our Indigenous Justice table, and there is a QR code that you can take the California Tribal Land Trust Survey. We are partnering with Decolonize Wealth Project to conduct an assessment of the needs of tribal land trusts in California, and your input will help to inform opportunities to grow the capacity of California tribes to acquire and manage land and strengthen advocacy for land back. And in partnership or following along with the recommendations from the Native Land Trust Council to facilitate the creation, training, and increased capacity of Indigenous land trusts, and shifting public language from land conservation to land justice. And so that is part of the work that we are doing with Indigenous justice. And we are very grateful to be here and to be in conversation and partnership with all of you. So Sulai.
Thank you. Thank you. It's nice to get to know these guys, these people up here. So a lot of the times we get questions of what can I do to support you all? And I think that they just mentioned a pretty tangible way to support a decolonizing effort. So be sure to catch that QR code out on the table. But so the first question we have today is, what were/are some of the challenges to land return within the areas of land your tribe has been working to get returned? And how did you overcome them? If there are efforts or strategies that make similar situations easier. So basically just how could you help other agencies or tribes kind of conduct that same type of land return?
I'll let Josh go into this deeper, but our sacred land, we just had to tell them we're never going to gamble on it. No casinos on sacred land. And made it pretty clear that sacred land is for sacred land. Want to say something about that? Okay. So, it made it fast track. Josh could probably comment more about it, but, to ensure to the federal government that, we're not going to put a casino where we dance and do our ceremonies. We ain't going to do that.
Sure, I'll just share from our experiences, and I do want to clarify that I'm speaking as an individual tribal member and not on behalf of our tribe, but that through our organization that we do support and participate in those advocacy efforts. And so when we were working on the land return, the 14,000 acres from Hat Creek back to Pit River Tribe, when I worked as TIPO, that, there were a lot of challenges. There was a lot of paternalism in terms of, putting the land into conservancy with Shasta Land Trust, and that it had to be, these white-led land trust owners that could oversee our lands. And just as mentioned, we're not going to put a casino. There's the confluence of the Pit River and Hat Creek in these sacred village areas where the land was being returned. And so there were those conditions, right? Signing a sovereign immunity waiver, ensuring that we weren't going to have a casino put in the sacred village area. And so I think, it really is a process to continue to challenge that. PG&E had taken over and still has a monopoly of those lands, even though they've gone into bankruptcy. It was really, having to advocate and say that this is tribal land. It's 14,000 acres now out of our 3.5 million square acreage, which is known as the 100-mile square. And so really having to push for that and to say, we don't have to put this through these white-led conservation efforts, that as tribes that we are able to steward and manage our own lands, and that we know those best practices for ourselves. And so we've seen that with PG&E over the last years, right? There's this uproar in terms of the wildfires that have taken place, and for California tribes, for Pit River, for Winnemem Wintu, we understand that history. We understand the destruction that has been caused by PG&E and how they still need to make good in rectifying that for our lands, for our communities, and for our salmon that have been destroyed, that the salmon are no longer going up our Pit River, because of the dams that were placed for, the the water and the power that's continued on the land. And so I think that's really important to note that, when people were saying like, oh, how awful PG&E is and these news stories, and it's like our tribes know that, our people know that, because we have been fighting this for close to 100 years now.
So a thought did occur to me in terms of our legislative path. I think if as tribes continue to take advantage of these opportunities in Congress, one of the things that, as I look back, really shaped our path was advocates. And our advocates in Congress were Congressman Huffman and Senator Padilla. And they were not just key, but they were pivotal in at times when the Forest Service was kicking back and kicking back and kicking back. It takes calls from senators sometimes to move bureaucracies. And that's exactly what happened for us. And so find a champion in Congress, and that will make your life a lot easier.
I guess it's some of the challenges to getting some of the land returned back to the people of the Hoopa tribe. Some of the struggles and challenges that we are faced is funding. We lack funding. The match, as most of you know, there's a match that they require when you're going for these grants. And say it's $100,000 grant with 10% match. That's like $10,000 right there. That where are we going to get $10,000 from a tribe that isn't very our logging practices are out of date? That it's hard to get that funding and to actually get grants or any type of resources to provide that. So I think funding is one of our challenges. Capacity, we need people out there on the field that are going to go survey the land, that are going to maintain the land. And we need people that can write these grants. We don't have very many people employed with the tribe that that could provide these needs that we need to get some of these funding and resources. And like I said, maintaining, once we get the land, it's like, okay, they give us the land, but as you guys know, there's like deliverables that we gotta present. And if we don't have any funding, how are we going to be able to deliver what they're asking for? And navigating through those different stages. It's like, I think I wrote like 2 proposals before, and I haven't got I haven't got anything. But yeah, I mean, and it's just tough. I feel like we have a planning department that is stretched to their ends. One lady, the manager, she's on a bereavement leave, and she's still working, and it's like she doesn't even really have time to mourn. And I feel bad because I mean, we're asking so much of her and also her staff, and it's just the economy is struggling. Our people are struggling in general. As you see, if once our land was taken from us, we had an increase in addictions, our social wellness, our physical wellness, our biological wellness. It all decreased. And I think that is a huge challenge that we are faced with. If we're struggling, if our social wellness is struggling, and then we got to put on that suit and tie and go to work every day, knowing that maybe my uncle passes away today over an overdose, or it's hard to put that mask on and then go present something to these people asking for money. It's just it's a real challenge, and I feel like that's something we're all faced with.
I think that it's both powerful and emotional to talk about these concerns. In these spaces, I think like what Jason is saying, it's easy to like put on that front of like, I got to be strong, powerful, willful, and you do. And at that same time, we all have a heart. We all have families, we all have communities and places that are dear to us. And so how do you manage those emotions while also having to be professional, being direct, and having the right language to speak from the heart, but also being it's like translating a language to be able to talk to these policymakers, these lawmakers who are able to come to that table with that professional mindset, and that's it, like emotions to the side. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that it is complex and it's ongoing. I don't think there's ever going to be a point where those emotions aren't connected for us local Native people. So I just appreciate the vulnerability that's being demonstrated before us, because it's really hard to let yourself get to that place. But this is something that we're all very passionate about. So it's kind of right there at the tip of the tongue. So I'm grateful to be facilitating such a in-depth conversation. So I think some of you all kind of spoke to this next question. Were there limitations put on the land that was returned, or to the tribe being able to do what is needed for the land return? And if so, do you have thoughts on how to deal with those limitations? Sure.
So one of the components of our legislation is an MOU with the Forest Service dealing with wild and scenic. Wild and scenic was a law that was passed federally. It was actually passed in the state of California first. Ronald Reagan authorized that bill in California. And it was really, the story is kind of relevant here. Round Valley was getting ready to be flooded by a dam project. And the Round Valley chairman showed up at the governor's office, Ronald Reagan was the governor at the time, and pleaded with the governor to sign the legislation because it would prevent that dam from going in and flooding their land. And Ronald Reagan was going to veto that bill, but he signed it anyway because he, in his words, he just couldn't bring himself to displace these people again. They had already been displaced, and now they were going to be displaced again. And so he signed that bill. And then it became federal law about 6 to 7 years later. It's a very paternalistic law, and it has a lot of limitations, and it is not respectful of Indigenous rights or sovereignty. And so it's, in terms of how we're going to navigate that, it's going to be a challenge. But I'm also working with some of the folks of the original authors of Wild and Scenic, and groups that are very involved with Wild and Scenic, and are advocates of that, and they want to change that law. They want to do some legislation that will recognize Indigenous sovereignty and Indigenous rights. And so we are working on some language to fix that law, along with specifically the MOU that we're working on with the Forest Service. So hopefully we get some traction there.
I'll just share that the purpose of the survey that's being conducted is that in gathering the data, that it will go into an assessment where Decolonizing Wealth Project will make grants to tribes and support a community of learning and practice. And so having these funding streams that are available, you know, we really have to ask those questions. What does it mean for California tribes that we all know have this very unique history? What does it mean for tribes here to be considered landless tribes? What does it mean for those 55 plus tribes that are considered non-federally recognized here in California, and the barriers and challenges that they come up against, where they're not able to apply for the state funding, where they're not able to, have that support in place because of paternalistic federal Indian law. And so I think that's really important. You know, what does it mean for these tribes that have a Superfund site next door to them, and it's the Bureau of Indian Affairs and Environmental Protection Agency that are responsible for the ongoing contamination of tribes that don't have clean and adequate drinking water and plumbing, and you know, their water is contaminated by mercury within their tribal communities. Like, these are realities that are being experienced today by California tribal communities. And so having those funding streams in place, being able to advocate in ways that we can navigate these laws and policies to support all California tribal peoples, all California tribal communities, is just really important, especially at this time, and need to be included in the Landback conversations.
I think some of the limitations that we're faced with right now is actually just pretty much what I just mentioned. Right now, we're in the process of trying to reacquire some land, 10,000 acres off of Pine Creek. off the Hoopa Valley Reservation. We recently learned that New Forest, this is Australia-based, forest land manager owns it and is planning to sell a portfolio of lands that was, originally our Aboriginal territory. And so right now we're kind of, in the process of trying to seal that deal. There was a couple other bidders that were in the race with us in the beginning, but now it's, just down to us and the last couple phases. New Forest still, they got it appraised. They didn't think it is, they thought it was worth a lot more. So they're still holding their value right there, and it's still pretty high. And, we're having to reach out to different funders, which philanthropy too is another, route we're having to take, which I just learned about probably like last year. Like, remember when Chairman Davis had me sit in on a webinar, philanthropy. I was like, yeah, I do that and get out of the office. I'm like, what is philanthropy? And I seen on the agenda Greg Maston, he's here, and he's actually, I reached out to him, who his father was on the tribal council, so yeah, he actually helped us out quite a bit. We went over to DC to this biodiversity funders conference, and now we're having these conversations with New Forest, and so we're currently trying to reacquire some Aboriginal territory right now. So that's kind of our limit.
Yeah, that's perfect, because that's actually our next question is like, giving folks a space and opportunity to kind of talk about some moving forward with new land return initiatives. So if there's any public or privately owned opportunities that you might have know about or involved with, and are these laws or policies changes that would make the return of land easier? But for my guess, it sounds like it's nothing about this is easy. Sounds like there's hoops and hurdles every turn. So that's just my prediction. So I guess I'll summarize the question. Are you moving forward with new land return initiatives currently? And are they public or private? And are there laws and policies that could change these land returns?
I think we, with our Sacred Lands Act, that we can move forward because, our whole force is sacred to our people, and ceremonies wasn't just done in one area. The medicine man and medicine people, they'd hike, miles and miles and miles out in the forest. And, we managed that forest for those people to be able to do that. We made those trails. So maybe we can use this land initiative to move forward for all of us, because, we hold all of the forest sacred. The land is sacred to us. And, it's not just where we practice our ceremonies. It's when we pray to the mountain and the rivers. There's like our church. Those people go to church with their big cross on it. We go to the mountains and we go to the rivers to pray. So we hold all that sacred. So maybe we can move forward that way.
So we have been approached by a few folks that are involved with land trusts, and we're learning. And like you said, Charlie, it can be complex. There's, in the state of California, especially, there's Williamson Act considerations. There's ag considerations. There's all these things that are very much outside of what Kenneth was talking about in terms of what our priorities are as Indian people, in order to have these land returns happen in a way that is respectful of tribal sovereignty is very difficult, because these things have issues or encumbrances on it that were post contact. These are things that we don't consider when we manage land for the resources that we manage for. So it's very difficult on the one hand, but there's also a tremendous amount of opportunity. I think we're looking into even creating a tribal land trust so that will enable us to navigate in that arena. So it's exciting, the opportunities that are coming up, but it's also a lot of work. And so that's kind of our kind of future in terms of what we're working on. And then obviously, we have about 2,400 acres and in a $1.1 million acre ancestral territory. We got a long way to go in terms of land return legislatively, because with the federal nexus, we're pretty much forced into the legislative process for land back in our territories.
There's a lot of laws and policies that are currently being developed. It's the new buzz, right? Land trusts are the new buzz. But tribes always need to have first right in the land return, that it was our land to begin with. It's still our land, no matter who's on it currently, like it is our land. And I think that really needs to continue to be said and pushed forward. The example that was given earlier, where the tribe is one of a dozen partners that's being considered, right? That, oh, maybe we'll give it to the tribe, but the stewardship agreement that's in place, or this conservation land trust that's in place, like, they're the ones that are being considered first. And I think that can be very damaging, that if you're not, those are conversations that I have where, there's well-intentioned do-gooder folks that will come up and say, like, they're like, oh, I heard you talking about land. Yes, come to my land and do ceremony on my land. And we're opening this up and inviting you. And we're like, that's not what we're asking for. We're asking for, we're asking for it back. We don't want to go and visit. We don't want to go and spend a day there. How generous of you, but no, we want it back. And so that really just, tribes have first right. And, for that to really be pushed forward in that sense, because I think just time and time again, when we were traveling to Sacramento and having to make the case that it's our land, it's our ancestral territory, this is our ceremonial sites, this is our village sites, like, we deserve to have, that first consideration, and to be, to be in these spaces and audiences that we really had to, the burden of proof is put on us, that we really had to make that case that, yes, we can steward our own lands. Yes, we can manage our own lands. The example that was given earlier with the university, right? That, there becomes this like fear and tension, like, we can't actually give the Indians land back. Like, what are we going to do? And so, really just being honest and truthful, that truth and history piece of what has happened, what continues to happen to California Native communities, and that truth and healing process, that the work and advocacy that we do, it is for the healing and health of our communities. It is for healthy communities. And that's only going to happen when we're able to be on our own land freely, when we're able to be on it and practice ceremony and not have those burdens and limitations in place that keep us, that keep the ceremonies happening, the puberty ceremonies happening on their sacred rivers in their village areas. Not having to go and ask the Forest Service for permission, not having to go and fill out the permits to be there for one day or for a 4-day ceremony, that we need to be able to have full access and first right to our own sacred lands.
I don't thank you guys. So we will start to open up any questions that the audience might have for our panelists. We have about 30 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, or shared experiences, I'll meet you all and whoever has a question. Mr. Ted. I think this will be all right. Thank you. Charley.
So I just have a comment. I think the key part is we need to educate the government, because we had that same issue when we got the 40 acres of Tulawat back the first time. They were afraid that we were going to put a casino on a piece of 40 acres. And we had to explain to them, this is ceremonial grounds. Why would we put a casino on our ceremony? This is the center of our world. This is our creation story. This is where we came from. And they still didn't understand it. But we were able to retrieve that 40 acres back. Thankfully for the city of Eureka was able to reach it with some stipulations. But back in 2015, when we went for the rest of the island, we educated the city council. And now there's no stipulations on that part of the island. So it has to be by educating people and telling them what it's about, and making them understand, because you're right. These are our ceremonial grounds. This is where we practice our ceremonies, and we do travel to different places to do ceremonies. Our medicine people have their high places where they do prayers to overlook Tulawat. They're all ceremony, and we're I think people have to understand, well, Native Americans want casinos. No, we want our land back to practice our ceremony so we can rebalance back into this world. So that's my comment.
Anybody? Yeah.
I had a question about Landback, and a lot of people are trying to utilize that 30-30-30 and trying to figure out how do we use it. And is there any progress towards a mechanism that is much simpler to follow, that the government has some process or some regulations to guide to make it easier for that? And how do you deal with the taxes? How do you deal with the ownership of that land? And especially if you're an unrecognized tribe or a tribe that's disenrolled, or, those conditions, how do you deal with the taxes? Some people say a land trust, but that's still, an entity that is not guaranteed to protect that land for you. Or a nonprofit, that nonprofit is owned by the state. And so what condition, could we head for?
Geneva, do you want to speak to that at all? If you want to answer 30 by 30 questions.
Anybody? Any of our panelists want to start off and let? Okay.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the question, and definitely hoping to do a deeper dive later this afternoon to answer some of those questions. But I think as it relates to your question around what policies are in place here at the state for land back and ancestral land return, the guiding policy right now is the Statement of Administrative Policy on Native American Ancestral Lands, which has come out of the governor's office. And that's really setting like a high level policy directive to all state agencies and departments to identify opportunities for increased tribal access and co-management, as well as ancestral land return. That policy specifically looks at the return of excess state lands. And so I know there was some conversation this morning about how much the state owns lands and how do we navigate those excess state lands processes to return those properties. And then here at the agency, we're taking an extra step in that governor's policy and shifting our funding programs to support the purchase of private property for ancestral land return. So definitely go into more details around that. As it relates to specifically the 30 by 30 initiative, really encourage folks to look at the Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy. It has 10 pathways to really navigate and implement the 30 by 30 goal, which is conserving 30% of lands and coastal waters by 2030. And you'll see in that strategy document a core commitment to partnering with tribes. And in that core commitment, there are clear steps of how everyone here within the state who's working towards that 30 by 30 goal should implement to partner with California Native American tribes. So those are some of the policies that we have in place. And I am really excited for today's conversation to learn what more policies do we need and how can we grow and shift how we are operating here in the state of California to be better partners with tribes. So please let me know what policy suggestions you all have. I'll be taking notes. And so really appreciate the conversation. And I think I did. I would love to hear it. I did ask for that. So thank you so much for the question.
Nice little preface for a later conversation, but I do see a couple hands, so I'm gonna go here because I've seen this hand first.
Dillahan Fraley. The question is directed to Geneva in regards to historic issues with tribes trying to put land to trust. Many county governments have standing resolutions on file for no net loss of taxes. And is there a strategy that you within that 30 by 30 and that governance directive to look at the county's responsibility and being supportive of transferring land into trust and other land back opportunities?
That's a great question and a hard question, which I appreciate. And so I would say that the Pathways to 30 by 30 strategy doesn't necessarily get directly to the land trust issue, or excuse me, the putting land into trust, because that's a federal process. And so the federal government is the one that sets up those regulations and policies for putting fee property into trust for federally recognized tribes. What we do want to do, though, is see that all the lands that are returned to tribes are supportive of tribal priorities, and to reduce the barriers that in the past have been put on these properties to ensure that we can be a better partner to tribes. And just for full candid conversation, there are still a lot of state laws that we are navigating and trying to fully understand and see where shifts need to be made. And so I know that's it doesn't really get to the exact question that you had, but it's really because it's at that federal process there. Yes, and then the state county relationship is one that is there, and so I think that is really ensuring that you're working closely with your county representatives. I think how kind of Josh mentioned is finding those champions within your local governments as well, and identifying those partnerships, because there are different jurisdictions and different processes throughout all of the levels of local, county, state, and federal processes. And I understand they all kind of come together in that fee to trust process. So I think the first immediate step there is to find those champions in your local and county governments. There you go.
Thank you. And I did see a hand up over here from Josh.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a chance respond to your question and give you some of our personal experience with that. This land that we had returned is both in Siskiyou County and in Humboldt County. It's two different national forests, so it's very complex in terms of negotiating that county support. And so what we ended up doing is, or what we ended up finding was that Humboldt County was very supportive. Siskiyou County, not so much. Two completely different ideologies, right? And so what we really focused on in our outreach with Siskiyou County was to get them to neutral. We didn't necessarily push for them to support our proposal. We just wanted them to be neutral, because if they were neutral, what that allowed us to do is move forward. And so if you have challenges like that, just try to get them to neutral, because if you push for support, sometimes it's too heavy of a lift for those county leaders that are elected to represent, frankly, people who are paternalistic and colonial.
Yep. Right on. That's crazy, because those village sites are only like 2 or 3 miles apart. To be in 2 different counties is just arbitrary, right? But I did see a hand. There's a couple hands, but I'm trying to remember who was first. Right here.
My name is Ellen Taylor, and I'm from the Mattole. Our resident tribe is the Mattole, and they've been incorporated into a sort of catch-all tribe, the Bear River Rancheria. But there's a strong component of Mattole indigenous people, and they're trying to accept their responsibilities for the land in the Mattole. And the leadership has contrived a project to evaluate all the habitat in their ancestral territories. It was a 2-year project, and it was granted by the Department of Fish and Game. They got, I think, $200,000 to do it. But they immediately encountered an obstacle from a large landowner, HRC, which is the Fisher family, and were not allowed on that land. I'm wondering if there are any kinds of ways to legislatively or regulationally maneuver past obstacles like that you've encountered in your successes. Thank you.
That's probably the most challenging situation, right? Private land is so what we've found is that there's, especially in the Orleans area, is that there's a movement to recognize these kind of settler colonial structures, and where those conversations are going are not necessarily, I'm going to come take your house, give me your house. It's more about cultural easements and finding ways to meet in the middle, and finding ways to create conversations and negotiations with private landowners about access. It's not ideal, but in terms of large landowners or even small landowners who have significant areas, whether it's gathering, whether it's ceremonial, whatever it may be, identifying it and as a community pushing that landowner to number one, recognize that, and number two, provide access to it, I think is probably a good first step.
I'm just curious, how many tribal peoples here have had Leo's law enforcement officers called on them, or had private landowners, or had any sort of law enforcement kick them off of their sacred lands, or have the cops called on them in our traditional gathering, in asserting our traditional gathering rights? Yeah. Just this past fall, we had, I was filming it was NBC Race in America series at our sacred waterfalls, and it was considered too political for state parks. And the question was, Colleen well knows, and the question that they were asking was, tell us about the cultural significance of the falls and of your sacred lands. And so I think, when we're talking about cultural easements, when we're talking about having those ordinances in place that we can even be on our own lands to participate in our traditional gathering, our fishing, our hunting, that, that's really important to remove those barriers that we're not, and even in the land return, we're not talking about surplus land. We're not talking about land that's been contaminated, that we don't have, the resources and the funding to be able to accept it back. We're not talking about burned out land. We're talking about our land, our sacred lands, and that needs to be returned. And so again, pushing for those laws and policies in place to remove all of those barriers and return that land to tribes.
I think I seen a hand over here, then I'll get to you. Oh, there's a couple. I think we have plenty of time, so no worries.
Hi, I have a question about federally recognized tribes and Landback. We're from the Bay, and obviously there's a lot of Ohlone out there, and so much of the land is not accessible or, given to natives. And how does that correlate with unrecognized tribes and Landback, if that makes sense?
It's up to you. All right.
Hello, everybody. I'm Karina Gould. I'm the tribal chair for the Confederated Villages of Lashawn Nation. I'm also the co-founder and co-director of the Sigorte Land Trust. So the question about how do we get our land back in urban areas, because our tribal territory has been almost entirely urbanized, and we get it back in a bunch of different kinds of ways, through cultural easements, through private landowners giving us land back, with us creating relationships with cities and park districts in different kinds of ways. And so each piece of land that comes back to us is a nuanced agreement. Getting sacred land back, like the West Berkeley Shellman, has been an ongoing fight for over 20 years, and most recently in the last 6 years in court. And so as a non-federally recognized tribe, whatever that means, my ancestors have always recognized us on the lands that we continue to be on and have never had a broken tie to. It's interesting. So as we were doing sacred site work in the Bay Area, it was really about bringing those ancestors home from the universities, the 9,000 that UC Berkeley holds, and many other institutions holds our ancestors. But because we're not federally recognized, they named them unidentifiable and would not allow us to get our ancestors back. But the prayer has always been to bring them home. And as a non-federally recognized tribe in an urban area, we found ourselves homeless in our own homeland, as many other tribal people. And so we created the first urban Indigenous women-led land trust in order to figure out how to bring them home. How do we get land to bring our ancestors home? And it's changed into a journey that has brought us back to creating our first arbor in 250 years on our territory. But you know, to what Colleen said about non-federally recognized tribes, about what do you do about the taxes? What do you do about having a nonprofit? And so you had to create a nonprofit in order for you to be able to actually have access to land at all. And, you know, really it was Beth Rose Middleton who wrote that book, Trust in the Land, professor at UC Davis, and really brought us to a conversation about what does native land trust look like. And it kind of blew my mind after we took over a sacred site in 2011 at Glen Cove, Segorite, that this was a possibility. So it's a tool that we use, and because we're not a federally recognized tribe, in order to do that. But you do have to pay taxes, you know, and not all taxes go away. You get county taxes. You have to go through the same process as any nonprofit to get your county taxes waived, but that doesn't include city taxes or bond measures. And so all of those things have to be taken into account. Those are things that you find out about later on. And so it's really our work now as we're finding this out as a land trust to really pass that information around to other people, that these are things that you have to account for. And I hope that answers your question. We could talk a lot more at 2 o'clock. Thanks.
I think there's a couple more hands. I think we have time. We have like 5 minutes because I did want to give our panelists a chance to do any final thoughts.
To give some context to my question, in between our ancestral lands, between Trinidad and Klamath, the coastal Nur people, the California highway system completely wiped out multiple villages, 100% devastation. The question is, how or where do we start in reclaiming the traditional land as within the jurisdiction boundaries of both the state and federal parks?
Oh boy. So when we talk about unfederally recognized tribes and villages and people groups, it's a hard conversation to have because it's through no fault of their own that they're in the position that they're in, and the struggle is real, and the struggle is uphill. I know one of the things that in our processes with Landback, we were stronger together. We had a lot of intertribal support for our legislation and our legislative efforts, because a lot of those efforts were also happening in other places as well, Hoopa, Yurok. I don't know a lot about your situation, but I do know that there's a lot of resources that local tribes have, a lot of local knowledge and a lot of advocacy within local tribes that are neighboring to you. And I would start there and see if there's opportunity to tap into some of the archaeological resources that have already been conducted that would help you take those first steps towards either, whether it's federal recognition, whether it's a pathway for cultural easements, whatever it is, that's those first steps. And I'm not a self-governance expert, but I think that's where I would start is start to gather that intertribal support and awareness within the local tribes about your situation and about the villages and the highway system, and kind of what's the goal, what's the vision, and get buy-in.
Just want to add that as a member of a federally recognized tribe that was born and raised in Ohlone territories, in non-federally recognized tribal areas, that I always felt a personal responsibility to advocate on behalf of our California Indian peoples and communities, right? We say that they weren't asking for our tribal IDs when the bounties were being collected for our heads. They weren't asking for tribal IDs when they were massacring us by our tribal communities. And so it's always been, a personal responsibility in terms of recognizing and not making that distinction between federally recognized and non-federally recognized. We have a huge issue of disenrollment and disenfranchisement here in California. So what does it look like for those tribal peoples where you can take away all of their rights as a tribal member, but you can't take away their land? And so land is the last step at that they're still trying to figure out, right? We have allotment lands within my family and back home in my tribal territories, and we are landlocked. We have $1 million cattle ranchers that are next door, and our allotment roads were privatized, and so we are essentially locked out of our land and of our home sites where we still have homes at. And we have to travel on ATV on lava bed roads that takes a couple hours to get there. You have to travel by canoe onto the big lake. And so it's a huge issue, and more strength in numbers for sure, more, recognizing it as the political tool that it is to continue to erase and further that invisibility of California tribal peoples. And we really have to look at it in that sense, that it is a political strategy for Ohlone communities, to not have that visibility. And now that's happened since Segorate, that's happened, right? But there's still all of these challenges that are put in place. And so advocating, that's part of the work that we do, is addressing, that erasure, addressing that invisibility, promoting the visibility, and recognizing that California is very distinct in that way, and that as California tribes, as California tribal peoples, there is definitely strength in numbers when we come together and advocate on one another's behalf.
So we do have one more question. This guy put me in a tough spot here. But yeah, for the sake of time, and I know my time is ground, so I'm sure y'all's are too. I'll just go with convenience.
Okay, this is taking it a little different direction. Since people have been talking about Landback, and it's been quite a while because I used to work with the Karuk tribe. Have you noticed within your tribe that your members are starting to come more alive to their traditional responsibilities?
Yes, for the most part, I believe. I think so. I think just being able to actually implement that also into the school system, into our curriculum, and teaching the youth that there's classrooms outside of these four walls. There's you go out there and you learn every day, about the waterways, about the forests, and that is our culture. And you're showing the youth that it's cool in a sense that to practice your culture out here, and this is a part of who we identify as. And I think that kind of just kind of goes on into some of the final thoughts of this discussion of Landback. And just gonna kind of read, I don't really like doing this, but reading off one of our letters of intent. I helped the chairman write, and it's in regards to the Landback and how it would improve the health of our people, and our personal well-being has always been interwoven with that of our natural resources. Presently, our salmon population is on the brink of extinction. Our drinking water supply is being contaminated by pesticides from marijuana gardens and our oak tree forests, which produce one of our main foods, our staple foods, acorns, and facing sudden oak disease and are being choked out by these conifer trees. the results of mismanaged ecosystems within the past 170 years since these territories have been taken from our control has contributed to the high rates of heart disease, diabetes, poverty, suicide, addiction. Being able to manage these resources again will improve not only our physical, our mental, our emotional, but also our cultural well-being and our people. And it has, the more land we acquire, the more our people are going to be out there, for one's jobs. You go out there and you put a low intensity burn on the ground, and that smoke, gets those bugs out of the acorns, which, attracts the deer, which, we harvest as well. So we're out there, practicing our culture and our tradition. And with us are, our nephews, and then in the waterways, we have our women with the children for, maybe, first 5 years that are, they have their kids on their back that are, peeling the willows, and they're in there, and, with the symbiotic relationship to the land, we're influencing not just each other, but, the youth, and making that positive, influence on them. And that's, releasing, getting those dams out of there and letting the waters, flow freely. We didn't used to have, these willow trees, they're brush, and they're strong and they're straight. And some baskets were, woven to carry water, and so, it's a very fine art. And I think, yeah, we are starting to see a change in our youth being more involved. And I think that starts, with, listening to the elders, who are the knowledge carriers, and, who have the most knowledge when it comes to managing these practices and our resources. And I think, using indigenous science that stems from these century-old observations and interactions with nature creates a unique place-based alternative for both research and management policies in a contemporary culture setting. So I think if we, like as mentioned earlier, if we kind of work together, we will start to see some solutions, and, our wellness will improve. Just give us our land back.
Yeah, to touch on that question, we don't forget, like, the missions and our forced assimilation. It wasn't that long ago, so there's a gap that we're filling, that our parents and our grandparents weren't allowed to speak their language, weren't allowed to do their tradition. But, they stayed strong, they stayed resilient, and they taught us. And now we're coming back strong. And yes, there is a huge movement in our culture and in our people. And it's getting our land back in our ceremonies and tying it all together. Groups like this, maybe it's time we get a group in a council and take it to Congress with this, and so, but yeah, the movement's there. So we can't forget, maybe it's time to rewrite the history and rewrite it true, because, those of us, we know it, and it's starting to come out, and it's coming out these days, the truth. And yeah, it's a good day to be Native.
So just one last plug for our Tribal Land Trust survey. Scan the QR code out at the Indigenous Justice table right outside the door to the left. And just sharing, that through our work that we are building a powerful movement of system-involved Native peoples inside and outside institutions, working to end the centuries-long imprisonment of our peoples, ancestors, relatives, and land. We are working to end the incarceration of living Native peoples in jails, prisons, and group homes across the state, to end the incarceration of our salmon relatives impacted by dams on our rivers, and to end the incarceration of our ancestors' skeletons locked away in basements and universities. We are doing this through developing powerful Indigenous leaders and communities and organizing with them to transform the systems, structures, and stories that keep us all imprisoned, both physically and spiritually. We've made concrete progress towards our goal of liberating, defending, and decolonizing our food systems, ancestors, and current living relatives. And through our umbilical cords, we are connected to the Salmon Nation, and we are interconnected through this reciprocal relationship, and we could not survive unless all of it is in balance. So land back, salmon back, and ancestors back. Thank you.
We do have a bonus question, so just hold tight.
After that, I don't feel like I need to ask the bonus question. And I think Binky and Jason both touched on it. But I just wanted to remind us too that, you know, as we work on these things, to really thank those cultural bearers and those people that did hold on to the land and held on to the culture for us, because that's the reason we're working to get this land back. So kind of in reference to the question I heard prior to mine, you know, part of the way that the Karuk tribe even got their federal recognition back was through the work of the people that were actually practicing the ceremonies in these spaces. So this is coming full circle, but even when we didn't have those spaces, we continue to practice our culture and practice our traditions in those spaces. I heard this family in front of me talking about it too, how many times the Leos have been called on them. And that's just kind of part of their tradition now, is that they're going to continue to gather in their traditional spaces regardless. So while I appreciate all the effort to make it legal, doesn't matter if it's legal or not, it's always been ours. We're going to continue to manifest ourselves in those spaces. So thank you.
I appreciate everyone's patience, and the interactiveness of this panel was exactly what we're trying to capture. We all understand that not all of us are going to know everything, but together I think that we will put a lot in the right way. So yeah, we're going to start transitioning into lunch, but again, we're prioritizing our elders and serving first. So let's try and have some type of order. And yeah, so thank you guys for bearing with us. We have one more.
Okay, so a couple of announcements for lunch. My name is Charley. Hi. So elders first, of course, we're finishing lunch setup. It'll be ready in exactly 1 minute. An announcement about overflow rooms for the afternoon. We have the room next door, 116, and y'all all have seats currently, but in case you find yourself without a seat later, room 106, which is the room immediately next door, will have some seating, and we have that room for the rest of the day. So if you want to sit and continue to interact with this room via Zoom, that is an option. Announcement number 2, if you might have parked in a faculty or a staff parking lot by accident, and that is not covered by your general parking permit. And this is not something to worry about right now, but if you did receive a parking citation, please bring them to us and we will refute them through the department. Okay, those are my announcements.
Good news. That was good news, because my alarm went off mid-panel, but Jason does have some final thoughts.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the WEOP people for hosting us and letting us be here today on your land. Definitely appreciate that. I want to recognize you guys. I know that's always something, you know, I hold true to, 'cause, you know, you never know. I might have a long lost cousin out there too, you know, but yeah, thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was very honored. Thank you, Yotwa.
Is this closing comments? Okay. Yeah, you know, one of the things I get with my job, I'm so busy, but one of the things that really touched my heart today was a lot of the discussion about unfederally recognized tribes and people groups. And I'll just say, if anyone just reach out to me, and I would like to help. Yotwa.
Just to follow up on that, that's part of the reason why I'm doing the work that we do today. When I was working within those tribal governance structures, there was a lot that I wasn't allowed to say, right? And so it got really tired, honestly, got really tired of the consultation process just being checking a box. In my personal experience, they didn't care whether we were federally recognized or non-federally recognized. You know, we were treated as like the Indians, the problem in the room. And so please, you know, again, come and visit our table, come and talk to us. Our outreach coordinator, Raylene Brown, is in the back of the room, I believe, waving her hand. So please come and connect with us. We are committed to our healing and transformation fully and unilaterally to locoitu.com, all my relations.
Yeah, one last thing, just want to say thank you, Councilman Jordan Haley, who is supposed to be here, had messaged me, and let me know that he's thanking me for being here because he had to attend to a fellow tribal member help get into a rehab, and I told him, yeah, no problem. There's always going to be a chance, other opportunity to be on a panel to speak. You never know if that person's last opportunity to get into that program is right now. And so I just want to give him a shout out for taking the time to help our fellow tribal member in person people. Really means a lot, and I'm sure that person's thanking him too. So if you see me, Jordan, thank you if you're here.
Maybe we can offer a last prayer in form of a song. All you guys want to, if you guys can keep time, go ahead in the audience. Oh no, no, oh no, no, hey, hey, oh, oh no, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, oh, hey, oh, hey, no, oh, hey, hey, oh, hey, oh, oh, no. Mm, 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 hey, oh, oh, no. Oh, hey, 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 oh, hey, oh, oh, no. Mm, mm, yo, toi.
And that concludes this panel. So thank you. One more, just kidding.
I missed y'all. So we did say elders first, but please be conscientious that this room is very full. So maybe having a seat, letting elders get up and get their food and waiting so that we don't bottleneck around the back, that would be great.